computer. Rootkit's malware-based computer security. Hello, I'm D.N.KOGGALAHEWA doing the presentation on malware-based computer security. Please join with me for this presentation and make sure let me a comment on this malware-based computer security. So let's take a quick look at an introduction to the malware-based computer security. Introduction to the malware-based software security. So we have to talk about what is malware, and you know that different types of malwares exist: viruses, worms, trojans and spyware. So rootkits and backdoors, logic bombs and time bombs. Then we are going to talk about the countermeasures or how to avoid these kind of attacks, malware-based security attacks. In that topic, we are going to talk about the antivirus softwares, NIDS, HIDS, firewalls and sandboxes. So let's take a quick look at on the background of this presentation. Before going on to the further details, we have to consider why such knowledge on malware-based computer attacks is essential. You know that millions of computer users suffering from malware-based computer attacks these days. They have to use different problems due to these kind of attacks. So we thought that the knowledge of malware-based computer attacks is essential to protect from any attack which has done by any hacker. So in this presentation, we are providing you some kind of a guidance to protect from any attack. Okay, what is a malware? Malwares are programs of programs that have a malicious, we call it mal, or unpleasant effect on your computer security. This covers many different terms that you may have heard before, such as you know that viruses, worms and trojans. Possibly a few you haven't, like rootkits, logic bombs and spywares. In this presentation, we will introduce, define and explain each of these subdivisions of malware, and we will give you some sort of examples as well. Okay, let's consider the first category of the malwares. Viruses. Most often you have an idea about what are the viruses. Maybe you don't know about the computer viruses, but you have heard about the biological viruses. So the computer viruses are self-replicating pieces of software that's similar to a biological virus. These viruses attach themselves to another program, or in the case of macroviruses, to another file. The viruses is only run when the program or the file is run. In this, which differentiate viruses from worms. If the program or file is not accessed in any way, then the viruses will not run and will not copy itself further. So you have to run your program to virus to run. When you are considering about viruses, different types of viruses are available. First thing is boot sector viruses, executable file viruses, terminate and stay resident, or we call it as TSR viruses, polymorphic viruses and the macroviruses. So we have to consider each of these types one by one. Let's see the first virus type, boot sector viruses. Boot sector viruses. These are the first type of viruses created. It hides itself in the executable code at the beginning of the bootable diskettes. You know that before 15 years, booting from floppy was a regular occurrence, meaning that such viruses were actually quite well spread by the floppy diskettes. And these viruses should leave a signature which subsequent infection attempts detects, so as not to repeatedly infect the same target. So using the signature, it will maintain the infected host. The second category, executable file viruses. These viruses attach itself to files such as exe or .com files Some viruses would specifically look for programs which are part of the operating system. There are few ways of adding a virus on an executable file, some of which work better than others. The simplest way and the least suitable was to override the first part of the executable file with a virus code, and it means that the virus executed but the program would subsequently crash, and leaving it quite obvious that there was an infection, especially if the file was an important file or an important system file. TSR viruses, the name implies the terminate and stay resident viruses. It is a term from DOS where an application would load itself into the memory and then remain there in the background. So it allows the computer to run as normal in the foreground. The more complex of these viruses would intercept the system calls. Others would attach themselves to the dir command and then infect every application in the directory that was listed. A few even stopped or deleted antivirus software installed onto the system. You can understand if a particular virus can stop the antivirus software, how much damage can it done. The polymorphic viruses. In early days, the viruses were very easy to identify because they had a certain signature or they had a predefined structure. But as the name implies, poly meaning multiple and morphed, meaning the shape. These viruses change themselves each time they replicate and rearranging their code, changing the encryption and generally making themselves look totally different. This created a huge problem. Instantly, there was much smaller signatures that remained the same of the better viruses, but the problem was increased with the release of number of polymorphic kits into the viruses writing community. The last kind of viruses, macroviruses. The macroviruses make use of the built-in ability of a number of programs to execute the code. So the programs such as Word, Excel have limited but very powerful versions of the Visual Basic Program language. This allows for the automation of repetitive tasks and the automatic configuration of specific settings. These macro languages are misused to attach a viral code to the documents which will automatically copy itself onto other documents. So using this feature, the macroviruses have been attached to the programs which have written using the above mentioned languages. Moving on to the second category of malware, worms. A worm is a powerful program after it has been started replicates without any need for human intervention. It will propagate from host to host, taking advantage of an unprotected service or services. Keep in mind that worms are older than the viruses. The first worm was created many years before the first virus. This worm made use of flaw in the Unix finger command to quickly bring down most of the internet. It will traverse a network without the need for a user to send an infected file or email. Most of the large incidents in the press recently have been worms rather than